I guess the Navy is so desperate these days, they're handing out medals to anyone who manages to crawl back alive. It was just dumb luck. Nothing brave about it. My father's snort of disgust cut through the solemn silence, right in the middle of the ceremony. Right as the Admiral was pinning the Purple Heart to my chest, my white-gloved hand gripped the seam of my pants so hard my knuckles bled. He was laughing with my brother filming a video for social media to mock the daughter who just returned from the dead. He was right. I was lucky to survive the hail of bullets in that Yemen hellhole. But what the smug man in the third row didn't know was, I had read the receipt. The bullets that tore through my unit's chest that day were bought with the exact $7,500 he and my brother took to sell our coordinates to the enemy. Before I tell you how I weaponized military discipline to turn that bloody receipt into a life sentence for my own flesh and blood hit-like, let me know what time you're listening to this and subscribe to the channel. If you believe the most ruthless betrayal doesn't come from an enemy's rifle, but from the signature of those sharing your own blood. The salt air of Naval Base Charleston usually cleared my head. Not today. It felt thick, suffocating. The brass buttons of my dress whites dug sharply into my collarbone as I stood at attention. Admiral Harris stood at the wooden podium. His voice, heavy with gravel and grit, echoed over the static of the PA system. He was reading the names of my 17 dead squad mates. 17 caskets draped in American flags. Then came the noise. A wet, dismissive snort from the VIP section. Row 3. God, how long is this gonna take? It was Robert, my father. He didn't even bother dropping his volume. Next to him, April had her phone out. The harsh glare of her clip-on ring light cut through the morning shadow. She was live streaming the entire thing, angling the lens just right to catch Robert's eye roll for her followers. I kept my eyes locked front, dead center, shoulders pulled back, chin strictly parallel to the deck. I didn't need to turn my head to know exactly what the rest of them were doing. Janice, my mother, was obsessively smoothing a microscopic crease on her $300 designer dress. A dress bought specifically for the local press cameras, not to honor me. Derek, my older brother, slouched low in his folding chair. He let out an exaggerated yawn, openly scrolling through his fantasy football roster. 17 names, 17 ghosts, and my blood relatives couldn't even fake giving a damn. I dug my fingernails into my palms. Hard. Through the thick cotton of my white ceremonial gloves, I felt the skin break. Warm wetness pooled against the fabric. I started the count. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Box breathing. Keep the heart rate under 90. Shut the noise out. The microphone clicked off. Heavy boots marched across the wooden stage. Admiral Harris stopped dead in front of me. He didn't wear the camera-ready smile most brass flashed for the press pool. His face was granite. His eyes were cold steel, assessing the damage behind my rigid posture. He held the Purple Heart. The gold profile of Washington gleamed mercilessly under the Carolina sun. He stepped into my personal space. The sharp, clean scent of boot polish and starch hit me. He positioned the medal over my left breast pocket. The heavy pin pushed through the white fabric. A sharp metallic click. Harris leaned in. His lips barely moved. This piece of metal, he whispered, his voice dropping to a low abrasive register meant only for my ears. It proves you can survive enemy fire. Let's see if you can survive the knives in your back. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. But my jaw locked tight. Knives in the back. Harris wasn't a man who wasted breath on empty metaphors. He was former Navy intelligence. A warning like that wasn't a condolence. It was a tactical briefing. The pieces clicking into place in my head were colder than the bronze sitting on my chest. Dismissed. The second the formation broke, the vultures descended. They didn't come to hug me. They didn't ask if the shrapnel fragments still buried in my ribs were aching in the coastal humidity. They wanted the photo op. April shoved her phone inches from my face. The flash strobed. Once, twice, 3 times. The harsh bursts of white light violently dragged my brain back to Yemen. Muzzle flashes in the pitch black. The deafening crack of AK-47s. The metallic smell of hot casings and fresh blood. I forced the memory down into a black box and slammed the lid shut. Robert slung a heavy, sweaty arm around my shoulder, dragging me in for the cameras. He smelled of cheap scotch and stale cigars. "Smile, Ollie," he muttered, squeezing my injured shoulder just a little too hard. "Look like a hero. Let's see how much cash the VA pays out for that mess of scars." My blood turned to ice. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't create a scene for April's live stream. I simply grabbed his wrist. I didn't twist it. I just applied exact targeted pressure to the radial nerve cluster. His fingers involuntarily popped open with a quiet gasp. I stepped out of his grip, immediately re-establishing a strict 2-foot regulation distance. "Don't touch the uniform, Robert." My voice was completely flat, dead. He sneered, rubbing his wrist, his face flushing red. "Still an ungrateful bitch. Let's go, Janice. I'm starving. The steakhouse reservation is in 20. You coming, or are you gonna stand there saluting the seagulls?" Derek tossed over his shoulder. He was already walking away, kicking the loose gravel. "I'll meet you there." I lied. I stood perfectly still and watched them walk away. A picture-perfect American family heading to a celebratory lunch. They didn't look back. Not once. The gravel crunched under my dress shoes as I marched to the overflow parking lot. The midday sun beat down on the asphalt, but I was freezing. I unlocked my beat-up Ford truck and climbed into the cab. The air inside was stifling, smelling of old coffee and dust. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the crisp white uniform, the purple ribbon. Slowly, deliberately, I unpinned the metal. I didn't put it in a velvet display case. I dropped it into the rusted steel lockbox bolted under my passenger seat. The metal-on-metal clank was final. A lock clicking shut on my past. Harris's words echoed in the stifling cab. "Knives in the back." I turned the ignition. The engine roared. I threw the truck into drive, my tires spitting gravel as I tore out of the lot. I wasn't heading to the steakhouse. I wasn't going to sit at a table and watch them cut into prime rib bought with my hazard pay. I was driving straight to the rotting docks, to Robert Noble's shipyard, to the locked office he never let anyone near. The hunt had started. The tires of my Ford crunched to a halt on the cracked concrete of the Noble family driveway. The old 2-story house sat attached to the front of Robert's rotting shipyard like a bloated tick on a dying dog. The air here was heavy. A suffocating soup of damp sawdust, salty marsh water, and the sharp tang of old motor oil. I used to learn to walk on this concrete. Now it felt like an active combat zone. I bypassed the front door and took the side entrance. I knew the security code. Robert never changed it. 0404. Derek's birthday, never mine. I started the sweep upstairs, Janice's bedroom. It reeked of cheap floral perfume and stale Chardonnay. I moved through the space with the silent precision of a tactical sweep, eyes scanning, registering anomalies. My gaze caught the white vanity table, the bottom right drawer. It was pushed in but not flush, 2 millimeters off, careless. I slid it open. Beneath a pile of discarded makeup brushes and tangled necklaces lay a thick manila envelope. The corner was torn open jaggedly. I recognized the official seal in the top left corner immediately. Department of the Navy. It was a casualty notification update sent to my primary emergency contact while I was bleeding out on a surgical table in a German military hospital. Janice had hidden it. She didn't want the hassle of bad news ruining her Tuesday afternoon hair appointment. I dropped the envelope. The paper felt like coarse sandpaper against my skin. Disgust clawed at the back of my throat. But I wasn't here for her. I went back downstairs. I pushed through the heavy fire door and stepped into the shipyard's main office, Robert's territory. The smell of motor oil here was so strong it made my eyes water. Dust motes danced in the pale light, filtering through dirty plastic blinds. I moved behind his heavy oak desk. The top drawers were just junk. Unpaid invoices. Losing betting slips for Derek's pathetic sports gambling habit. Then I checked the bottom drawer. It didn't budge. I ran my fingers under the lip. A heavy steel master lock secured a thick metal hasp. Robert was cheap. He wouldn't buy a real safe, just a heavy lock screwed into an old desk. I didn't waste time looking for a key. I took a half step back. I shifted my weight to my left leg, planting it firm on the greasy concrete. I I raised my right foot, driving the steel-reinforced heel of my combat boot in a straight, violent line dead center into the wood housing the lock. Close quarters battle breach. Crack. The aged oak splintered instantly. The metal hasp tore free from the screws. The drawer bounced open on bent steel tracks. I dropped to one knee. Inside was a chaotic mess of tax forms and bank statements. I dug past the recent ones. I was looking for a specific timeline. 8 months ago. The week before my convoy was hit. My fingers brushed a crumpled piece of thermal paper, a wire transfer receipt. The ink was fading, but the bold black numbers were clear. Recipient Maritime Research. Amount $7,500. Authorized signature Robert Noble. I checked the date and timestamp. Exactly 48 hours before the ambush in Yemen. Before the mortar tore through the armor of my Humvee. Before 17 good men burned to death in the sand. I stared at the number. $7,500. I did the math in my head. That was the exact amount Derek owed his bookie last fall. The exact amount Robert needed to fix the leaking roof of this miserable office. My life, my squad's lives, traded for a gambling debt and some roofing tar. The sickness hit me then, a violent physical wave of nausea. I tasted bile. I clamped my jaw shut and swallowed it down. I pulled out my phone. I snapped a picture of the thermal paper, making sure the signature was in focus. I opened an encrypted channel and sent the file to Ethan Cole. Ethan was a former Intel analyst. Honorable discharge. Metal brace on his left leg. He was the only person breathing I actually trusted. Run this, I texted. The weight was suffocating. The silence in the office pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the distant hum of a boat engine on the water. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Ethan's name flashed. I answered. Yeah. Ollie. Ethan's voice was tight, shaking. Where did you get this? Just tell me what it is, Ethan. Maritime Research is a ghost. It's a known shell company for the rebel factions in that sector. Ollie, whoever signed this transferred money to open a verification channel right before receiving a massive offshore deposit from them. They sold your convoy's route. The phone slipped from my fingers. It hit the concrete floor with a dull thud. My father didn't just abandon me. He sold me. He sold the United States Navy. If you have ever felt the sickening gut punch of finding out the people you trusted most were stabbing you in the back for their own gain, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment saying, I survived, to show that no matter how deep the betrayal goes, we don't break. And subscribe to the channel because I am about to show you how a survivor fights back. My phone buzzed on the floor. A text message lit up the cracked screen. April, steakhouse in 10 minutes. Dad says don't be late and don't look depressed. I'm going live. I looked at the glowing screen. Then I looked at the heavy leather holster concealed under my jacket. I drew the Glock 19. The metal was cold, familiar, comforting. With a sharp flick of my thumb, I pressed the magazine release. The heavy clip dropped heavily into my left palm. I pulled the slide back, ejecting the chambered round. The brass casing pinged off the concrete floor, rolling into a dark corner. I laid the empty, useless gun flat on the shattered oak desk. They weren't worth a bullet. I turned around and walked out the door, heading to dinner with completely empty hands. The heavy brass-handled door of the downtown steakhouse pulled shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the street. Inside it was another world. Low lighting. The soft, meaningless hum of generic jazz. The smell of roasted garlic, expensive butter, and seared meat hung thick in the air. I walked past the host stand wearing my olive drab field jacket and scuffed boots. I didn't fit in. I didn't care. My hands were empty. I had left the Glock on the shattered oak desk back at the shipyard. This wasn't a firefight. This was a reconnaissance mission inside a slaughterhouse. I spotted them at a large corner booth. A picture-perfect American family. Robert was holding court. He wore a tailored sports coat that strained desperately against his gut. He snapped his thick fingers at a passing waiter, pointing to his empty glass. Bring another bottle of the Cabernet, the reserve. Don't bring me that cheap house garbage. I slid into the curved leather booth. I sat at the far edge, leaving a deliberate 2-foot gap between myself and Derek. I kept my spine straight, shoulders square. The waiter hurried over with the wine. He looked at me, taking in the field jacket. "Can I start you with a glass, ma'am?" "Ice water," I said. My voice was flat. "Leave the lemon out." Janice let out a sharp, theatrical sigh. She adjusted the collar of her designer silk blouse. "Really, Oliver, we're celebrating your return. You can't even have one drink with your family. You always have to make everything so difficult." I didn't answer her. I reached for the thick linen napkin rolled in front of me. I unrolled it. I flattened it against the dark wood of the table, edge to edge. I folded it into a perfect uniform square. Then I folded it again, pressing the crease down until it was razor sharp, controlling my hands, controlling my breathing. The food arrived. The waiter set a massive bone-in ribeye in front of Derek. The meat was charred black on the outside, but as Derek immediately dug his serrated steak knife into the center, the reality revealed itself. Rare. Screech. The metal blade dragged hard across the white porcelain plate. The sound sent a physical jolt up my spine. Thick, dark red juices bled out of the cut meat, rapidly pooling around his mashed potatoes. My eyes locked onto the red puddle. It looked exactly like the floor of the medical transport helicopter over Sanaa. Derek chewed with his mouth open. Grease shone on his lower lip. He swallowed hard, took a massive gulp of the reserve Cabernet, and slammed the glass down. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, completely ignoring his napkin. "So," Derek smirked, pointing the tip of his bloody steak knife directly at my chest. "Military pay must be real good these days. You get a bonus for getting your truck blown up, or are you gonna take that shiny purple heart down to the pawn shop? See what kind of cash you can pull for it." $7,500. That was the number screaming in my head. That was what the blood on his plate cost. That was the price tag he and Robert put on 17 American soldiers. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I stared dead into Derek's eyes, watching the arrogant little muscle twitch in his jaw. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Suddenly, a blinding white light exploded in the periphery of my vision. April. She had clipped a plastic ring light to her iPhone and shoved it halfway across the table, aiming the lens right at my face. "Say hi to the stream, sis," April chirped. Her voice was artificially pitched up. Fake. Plastic. A performance for strangers on the internet. "We are out to dinner celebrating my big sister, the war hero. Give us a smile, Ollie. Everyone is watching." The phone screen faced me. I could see the little heart icons floating up the side of the app. People tapping their screens, buying into the lie of the supportive noble family. Janice leaned across the table, her face pulling into a mask of maternal concern that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Oh, Oliver, please, drop the miserable face. Just for one night, we are all so incredibly proud of you. Stop ruining the family dinner with this mood." Gaslighting. Textbook and relentless. I was the problem. I was the one ruining the $150 steaks with my trauma. I looked down at the glass of ice water the waiter had placed in front of me. A single black housefly was floating on the surface of the melting ice. Dead. Drowning in a pristine, expensive crystal glass. That was this family. Complete rot wrapped in a white tablecloth. Inside the breast pocket of my jacket, my burner phone vibrated. Not a standard ring. 3 short, sharp bursts. Tactical encryption. I kept my right hand on the table. I slowly slid my left hand into the pocket. I pulled the device out just enough to read the locked screen. A secure text message from a DC area code. Admiral Harris. Wire confirmed. They are active targets. Hold position. Do not engage. Active targets. The words rewired my brain in a fraction of a second. The sickening disgust I felt for the people sitting around this table evaporated. The anger vanished. They weren't my father. They weren't my mother, my brother, or my sister anymore. They were hostile contacts in a federal treason investigation. Ice water rushed into my veins. The tactical grid dropped over my vision. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked up. Robert was raising his wine glass, laughing loudly at another one of Derek's terrible jokes. He looked over at me, expecting to see the broken, defeated daughter he had spent 25 years grinding down into the dirt. Instead, I looked straight into his eyes and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a slow, dead, chilling pull of the lips. The kind of smile a predator gives right before the trap snaps shut. Robert's laugh died instantly in his throat. His hand froze in mid-air, the red wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. The smugness drained out of his face, replaced by a sudden, primitive confusion. He didn't know what I knew, but his gut knew something was terribly wrong. I placed my perfectly folded square napkin gently next to the dead fly in my water glass. "I'm full," I said. I stood up, turned my back on the bloody steak, and walked out. The drive from the steakhouse downtown to Naval Base Charleston took exactly 22 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the cab of my truck was absolute. I bypassed the main civilian gate and took the secondary access road. The military police guard at the checkpoint recognized the bruised field jacket and the hard look in my eyes. He checked my ID, scanned the barcode, and raised the heavy steel barrier without a word. I parked outside the Intel Command building. It was past midnight. The air coming off the harbor was cold, biting through the thin cotton of my shirt. I badged into the facility. My combat boots hit the polished vinyl floor. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed down the long, empty corridor, harsh under the pale, buzzing fluorescent lights. Admiral Harris's office was at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open. I walked in. He didn't turn around. He stood facing the reinforced glass window, looking out over the dark water of the Atlantic. The only light in the room came from a brass desk lamp aiming a tight pool of yellow light onto the center of his glass-top desk. Sitting perfectly centered in that pool of light was a thick folder. Classified red. Top secret. Harris didn't offer me a seat. He didn't offer fake sympathy or ask how the steak dinner went. He just gave a short, hard nod toward the desk. "Read it." I stepped up to the glass. I flipped the heavy red cover open, my eyes engaged scanning the dense blocks of text, skimming, pulling the critical data points out of the white noise, bank routing numbers, offshore holding accounts in Cyprus, IP addresses bouncing through 3 different encrypted servers, then the names. The offshore accounts didn't dump the money directly into Robert's failing shipyard. That would be too obvious. The transfers were broken down into smaller randomized deposits, 1,200 here, 2,000 there, over the course of 3 weeks, all of them funneling directly into a regional bank account registered to D. Noble, Derek. My brother was the broker. He used his online sports betting accounts to wash the money, placing guaranteed losing bets with overseas bookies who were actually rebel shell companies, then receiving refunds to his primary checking account. The timeline was laid out in black and white ink. The final largest deposit hit his account exactly 24 hours before the mortar round ripped through the engine block of my Humvee. He didn't just know, he coordinated it. He sold our patrol route to cover his own pathetic debts. My vision narrowed. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Harris finally turned away from the window. He walked over to the desk. His large, calloused hand reached out and flipped to the very last page in the thick stack. "This is an intercepted email," Harris said. His voice was low, coarse. "From the rebel faction's local command back to their financier. Read the attachment." It was a scanned document, a standard verification of contract fulfillment, a receipt for murder. I read the text. It was translated from Arabic into blunt administrative English. Target coordinate confirmed, convoy neutralized. Casualty verification for fund release 17, killed in action. 1 wounded in action. Oh, noble, critical. My eyes dragged down to the bottom of the page, to the signature line. The rebels needed proof from their inside source that the hit was successful before releasing the final payment. They needed the source to look at the butcher's bill and sign off on it. Their scrawled in cheap blue ink was a signature I had seen 1,000 times. On my report cards, on the shipyard payroll checks, on the birthday cards he bought at the gas station. Confirmed by our noble, Robert. He looked at a piece of paper that listed his own daughter as critically wounded. He saw the number 17 next to the word killed. And he picked up a pen. He signed his name to get his hands on the rest of the cash. The cold numbness inside me snapped. It wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. It was a massive silent collapse of everything I thought I knew. The father who taught me how to tie a slipknot. The brother who used to sneak me beers behind the bleachers. They were gone, replaced by two hostile targets staring back at me from a piece of paper. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. I grabbed the edge of the red folder and slammed it shut. The crack echoed like a gunshot in the quiet office. I squared my shoulders, I locked my knees. I stood at absolute rigid attention. Harris looked at me. He let out a long, heavy breath. He looked older under the harsh light. The FBI counter-terrorism unit is taking the lead, Harris said flatly. They move in tomorrow morning. You are compromised. You have every right to recuse yourself from this op, Lieutenant. Taking your own family in front of a federal judge, it breaks people. Nobody will question your loyalty if you walk away right now. I didn't break eye contact. My silence killed 17 of my men, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was a weapon. I am not walking away. Harris studied my face, searching for a crack. He didn't find one. Sir, I continued, my tone dropping to a hard, low register. I need authorization to conduct a tactical sweep of the maritime facility tonight. Before the feds arrive, I need the hard drives. Harris didn't say a word. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. I turned on my heel and walked out. 2 a.m. The coastal fog was thick. It rolled off the Atlantic, crawling over the cracked asphalt of the shipyard access road. It smelled like dead fish and low tide. I cut the engine of my truck a quarter-mile down the street. I walked the rest of the way in silence. Black field pants, black boots, a black hoodie pulled tight. Operator mode, no memories, no nostalgia. The little girl who used to think Robert Noble was a god for building boats in this yard was dead. Buried under 17 caskets, I reached the rusted chain-link fence. The perimeter security was a joke. Robert always bragged about his custom camera setup. Nobody gets past my tech, he used to boast over beers. His arrogance was his biggest tactical flaw. I spotted the main junction box mounted low on a cinder block pylon. I dropped to one knee. I pulled the multi-tool from my belt. The cheap plastic housing snapped off with one twist of my wrist. Inside a mess of red and black wires. I didn't need to cut them all, just the feed line to the local DVR snip. 15 seconds. The red recording lights on the mounted cameras went dark. The fortress was blind. I moved. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I flowed through the shadows of the dry-docked hulls, placing the balls of my feet down first to absorb the sound. Sliced the pie, clearing blind corners. Moving with the muscle memory of 100 urban sweeps. I reached the foreman's elevated office at the back of the main hangar. It was an enclosed shack built from corrugated aluminum and cheap plywood. The door was secured with a heavy padlock. I didn't bother breaking it. I checked the side window. The latch was broken. It had been broken since 2018. Robert was too cheap to replace it. I slid the glass up and pulled myself through the narrow gap. The air inside was stagnant. It smelled of spilled coffee, cheap cigars, and industrial grease. I pulled a small tactical light from my chest pocket. I clicked it on. Red lens. It preserved night vision and didn't bleed light outside the windows. I swept the beam over the chaotic main desk. Blueprints. Empty styrofoam cups. A heavy layer of dust. I ignored it all and focused on the heavy steel tool chest bolted to the floor in the corner. I walked over. The top drawer was jammed with greasy wrenches and screwdrivers. I started pulling them out, tossing them onto the dirty floor with dull clanks. Deep in the back, buried under a pile of rusted spark plugs, I felt it. A metal box, too heavy for its size. I pulled it out. It was a weatherproof lockbox. I wedged the flathead of my multi-tool under the latch and twisted hard. The cheap lock popped. Inside was a thick anti-static silver bag. I ripped it open. A Western Digital backup hard drive. I set my Panasonic Toughbook on the desk. The hinges creaked slightly in the dead quiet. I booted it up. The screen cast a pale cold glow on my face. I connected the drive. A password prompt popped up. Robert was a creature of habit. He thought he was smart, but his security protocols were garbage. I didn't need Ethan to hack this. I typed in the shipyard's founding year followed by Derek's initials. 1988DN, access granted. The drive was full of folders. I ignored the payroll and tax evasion docs. I opened the folder marked Missed Invoices. It was a goldmine of treason. Dozens of email chains forwarded from Derek to Robert, offshore routing numbers, cryptic messages from the middleman in Dubai. Then I saw it. A local text file saved directly to the drive used as a ledger note by Robert. I clicked it open. Payment cleared. Route sent. Keep this quiet from that little bitch Oliver. Navy doesn't need to know. That little bitch. I stared at the words on the glowing screen. There was no pain, no tears, just a cold, hard knot of absolute, unfiltered killing intent forming in my gut. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a high-capacity thumb drive, and jammed it into the USB port. Copying. 45%. 80%. Complete. I pulled the drive. I shoved it deep into my pocket. I wiped the keyboard, closed the laptop, and shoved the empty hard drive back into the box. I left the wrenches on the floor. Let him know someone was here. Let him sweat. I slipped back out the window. I moved back through the fog, retracing my steps to the street. The air felt colder now. I reached my truck. I unlocked the door. Suddenly, a blinding beam of light sliced through the fog. High beams. A black lifted Ford F-150 was parked 20 yards down the dead-end street. The engine was idling low, a deep, menacing rumble. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I froze. I didn't reach for my waist. I just watched. A man was leaning against the grill of the truck. Heavy leather jacket, thick neck, tattoos crawling up his jawline. He was taking a long drag from a cigarette. The cherry burned bright orange in the gloom. He wasn't local police. He wasn't private security. He was muscle. The rebel faction's stateside handlers were watching Robert's property. They knew the FBI was sniffing around the wire transfers. They were protecting their investment. The man blew a thick cloud of smoke. He didn't move toward me. He just stared. A silent, violent warning. I didn't blink. I didn't break eye contact. I opened the door of my truck and climbed in. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I shifted into drive. I didn't turn around. I didn't back up. I slammed my boot down on the gas pedal. My truck surged forward, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. I drove straight at him. The tattooed man didn't flinch until I was 10 feet away. He finally stepped back, eyes wide, as I ripped past the heavy grille of the F-150, missing his bumper by inches. I hit the main road, the thumb drive burning a hole in my pocket. The war had officially come home. The raid happened at 8 in the morning. FBI tactical units hit the Noble House and the shipyard simultaneously. I watched it unfold from a burner laptop in a cheap motel off Interstate 26. Survival instincts make rats do ugly things. By 9:15, the internet was on fire. April didn't hire a lawyer. She grabbed her phone and went live on social media. I pulled up the feed. April's face filled the screen. Her expensive mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, dark tracks. Perfect lighting, perfect angle. Pure acting. My sister is sick. April sobbed, staring into the camera lens. Oliver has severe PTSD. She's completely paranoid. She's making up insane lies, framing my dad and my brother to cover up her own military failures in Yemen. She's lost her mind. The comment section exploded. Thousands of strangers calling me a traitor, a psycho, demanding the Navy strip my Purple Heart. Stolen valor, they screamed. Then came the audio clip. April played it right into her phone's microphone. It sounded like my voice. A slightly tinny digital distortion clipping the edges of the words. I hate them. I'm going to ruin this family. I don't care who gets hurt. Deepfake AI. Cheap, easy to generate, deadly effective for the mob. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress and watched my reputation get butchered in real time. I didn't feel angry. I felt absolute freezing contempt. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The caller ID flashed. Mom. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. I hit accept and pressed the speaker button. I set the phone down on the fake wood table. Oliver. Janice's voice ripped through the tiny speaker. It was a frantic, shrill screech. Oliver, please tell me you're there. I kept my mouth shut. I listened to her hyperventilate. You have to stop this, Janice wailed. The FBI tore the house apart. They took Robert. They took Derek in handcuffs. You have to call them back, Oliver. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you're sick. You are pushing your father and brother into a death sentence. I stared at the ceiling fan cutting lazy circles in the air. They sold coordinates, Janice, I said. My voice was a flat line. They sold my unit to a terror cell. We didn't know. The lie was so fast, so practiced. Robert didn't know they were terrorists. He thought it was just some overseas shipping competitor wanting route info. The shipyard is underwater. Oliver, we were going to lose everything. We just needed the money to save the family business. The defense of a coward. Hide behind the business. Hide behind the family. I picked up the phone. I held it close to my mouth. If the money was to save the rotting shipyard, I asked, my tone dropping to a razor edge, then why did you drive a brand new $80,000 Cadillac SUV to my medal ceremony yesterday? Silence on the line. A heavy, guilty silence. I saw the bank logs, Mom. I continued driving the Blade in. I saw the $30,000 used to clear your personal credit card debt. I saw the down payment for the SUV. Hazardous business loans don't come with non-disclosure agreements from radical insurgents. Oliver, please. Her voice broke. The fake panic was gone. Now it was just pathetic begging. I just want my family to be at peace. Peace. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. You bought your peace with the blood of 17 dead Americans, I said. I stood up, the cheap motel carpet rough under my bare feet. I looked out the dirty window at the gray Carolina sky. This family is dead. I pressed the red button. The call disconnected with a sharp digital beep. 45 seconds. That was all it took to permanently sever a 25-year bloodline. If you have ever been stabbed in the back by the people sharing your blood and watched them use tears and fake outrage to manipulate their way out of their own crimes, hit the like button on this video. Leave a comment saying, I understand. Your support is the absolute strongest weapon I have against the pathetic media circus my family tried to build. I walked into the motel bathroom. I turned on the cold water and splashed my face. I looked in the mirrored medicine cabinet. No tears, just a soldier staring back. I walked back into the room. I unzipped the black garment bag hanging on the closet door. Inside was my navy dress white uniform. Crisp, flawless. The uniform they mocked yesterday. The uniform I was going to wear to bury them today. I dressed in silence, every button fastened with military precision. I slid the heavy black thumb drive into my breast pocket. The metal felt cold against my chest. I grabbed my keys. I walked out of the room and let the door slam shut behind me. I wasn't heading to the shipyard this time. I was heading to a place Robert couldn't buy his way out of. The Naval Judge Advocate General's courtroom. The Judge Advocate General hearing room at Naval Base Charleston was designed to be intimidating. Dark oak paneling lined the walls. There were no windows. The only sound in the heavy sterile air was the low mechanical drone of the central HVAC system pushing cold air through the ceiling vents. I sat at the witness table. Dead center. I wore my dress whites. The fabric was ironed flat, the creases down my pant legs, sharp enough to cut paper. The Purple Heart sat perfectly leveled on my left breast pocket, pinned exactly a 1/4 inch above the seam. I rested my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. No fidgeting. No movement. Just waiting. Directly across the room, 15 feet away, sat the defense table. 4 chairs, 4 nobles. They didn't look like the picture-perfect, smiling American family from the steakhouse anymore. The arrogance had been stripped away by federal search warrants and early morning raids. They looked exactly like what they were, cornered rats. Janice sat with her shoulders hunched forward. She wasn't wearing designer silk today, just a wrinkled, oversized gray sweater. She kept twisting a shredded tissue in her lap, her eyes glued to the floor. Next to her, April looked small. The ring light was gone. The fake internet confidence was gone. She was just a 22-year-old girl realizing that cancel culture doesn't apply in a federal military tribunal. Derek was sweating, literally. I watched a thick bead of cold sweat trace a jagged line down his left temple, catching in his overgrown stubble. He kept swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was withdrawing from the adrenaline of his sports bets. He was finally facing the house, and the house always wins. Then there was Robert. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit he probably dug out of a garment bag from a decade ago. The collar of his shirt was tight around his thick neck. He was leaning forward, his heavy arms crossed tight over his chest, trying to project the same dominant blue-collar authority he used to run his rotting shipyard. It wasn't working. The military prosecutor, a lean Marine Corps major with a severe high and tight haircut, stood up. He didn't look at the noble family. He looked straight at the three-judge panel sitting elevated at the front of the room. Admiral Harris sat in the center chair. "The charges are federal," the major stated. His voice was loud, sharp, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Treason, economic espionage, providing material support and tactical intelligence to a designated foreign terrorist organization resulting in the deaths of 17 United States service members." The words dropped into the room like heavy lead weights. Treason, terrorist, deaths. The silence that followed was suffocating. I slowly turned my head. I didn't glare. I just swept my eyes across the defense table, a cold clinical assessment of hostile targets. Janice flinched, hiding her face behind her hands. Derek completely dropped his chin to his chest, refusing to look up. April buried her face in her mother's shoulder, a muffled sob escaping her throat. None of them could meet my eyes. Not one. The people who had mocked my scars, the people who had laughed about my hazard, pay the people who had used an AI voice generator to tell the world I was an insane, paranoid bitch just 48 hours ago. They couldn't even look at the soldier they created. Only Robert tried. He locked eyes with me. He tried to summon the old glare. The one he used to use when I was a teenager to force me into submission. The one that said, "I am the man of this house, and you are nothing." I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I didn't feel intimidated. I just felt nothing. He was a dying man trying to flex a broken muscle. The realization that his glare wasn't working anymore pushed him over the edge. Cornered animals always bite when they run out of space. Robert slammed his heavy, calloused hands flat on the defense table. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a rifle shot. He shoved his chair back, roughly, the wooden legs screeching against the floor. He stood up. His face was beet red, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. "This is a joke," Robert bellowed. His voice was hoarse, echoing off the dark wood panels. "You have nothing. This is a setup. You think you can haul a hard-working American businessman in here on the word of a crazy girl?" The major didn't react. Admiral Harris didn't even blink. "She's sick in the head," Robert shouted, pointing a thick, trembling finger directly at me. He was totally losing control, falling back into his oldest, most pathetic habit. Blaming me. "She's been crazy since she was a kid. She's pulling this whole paranoid stunt to get back at me because I told her the military was a waste of time. Because I wouldn't pay for her college. Where's your proof?" "You have no proof." He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the reaction. Waiting for me to yell back. Waiting for me to break down and cry, proving to the room that I was the unstable, emotional daughter he claimed I was. I didn't move a single muscle. I kept my hands flat on the table, my spine perfectly straight. I didn't offer him a single syllable of defense. The gray rock method. You don't argue with an active shooter. You neutralize them. I slowly shifted my gaze away from my red-faced father. I looked up at the elevated bench. I locked eyes with Admiral Harris. Harris's face was carved from granite. He looked at the screaming man in the cheap suit, then looked back at me. A silent conversation passed between us. The trap was set. The target was in the kill zone. Harris gave a single slow nod. He didn't bang a gavel. He didn't yell for order in the court. He simply looked to his left at the young Navy tech officer manning the AV station in the corner of the room. The tech officer pressed a button on his keyboard. The large high-definition monitor mounted on the wall directly behind the witness stand flickered to life. The screen glowed a harsh, bright white, casting long, sharp shadows across Robert Noble's panicked face. The pin was pulled. The large, high-definition monitor on the wood-paneled wall flared white. A raw audio file appeared on the screen, the digital sound wave hovering in absolute stillness. The tech officer hit play. A sharp crackle of static filled the room, immediately followed by the unmistakable gravelly voice of Robert Noble. It wasn't the fake polished tone he used for clients, and it wasn't the screaming defensive bark he just threw at the judges. It was his casual everyday voice, the one he used when he thought nobody was listening. The payment cleared, yeah, all of it. The audio was crisp. It had been pulled directly from the encrypted hard drive I ripped out of his shipyard office. The FBI had cracked the rest of the metadata. Derek's voice answered on the recording, sounding nervous and high-pitched. "You sent the route, the whole convoy schedule." "I sent it," Robert's voice confirmed, harsh and annoyed. "Just keep your mouth shut. Keep this quiet from that little bitch Oliver. The Navy doesn't need to know where the cash came from. We fix the roof, you pay off your bookie, and we move on." The recording cut out with a sharp digital click. The silence that slammed back into the courtroom was absolute. It felt like all the oxygen had been sucked through the air vents. I kept my eyes locked on Robert. The transformation was immediate and total. The aggressive chest-puffing patriarch was gone. The red flush drained out of his face, leaving behind a sickening pasty gray. His jaw hung open, the muscles in his thick neck going slack. He didn't yell. He didn't bang the table. His knees simply gave out. He collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, his eyes wide and fixed on the blank monitor. The mask wasn't just pulled off. It was shattered. To my left, Janice let out a wet, gasping sound. She threw her hands over her face, folding her body in half over the defense table. It wasn't the fake, theatrical crying from the phone call. This was the ugly, humiliated sobbing of a woman realizing her $80,000 SUV was going to be repossessed by the federal government. Derek was worse. He didn't cry. He just stared at his own hands, trembling violently against the dark wood. He looked like he was going to throw up. He knew what federal prison did to soft gambling addicts who sold out American troops. Lieutenant Noble, Admiral Harris's voice, cut through the pathetic sounds of the defense table. He didn't look at them. He looked at me. "Do you have anything to add for the record before this panel issues its ruling on custody?" I stood up. I didn't rush. I placed my hands on the edge of the table. I smoothed the front of my white uniform jacket, ensuring the fabric laid perfectly flat. I looked directly at the 4 people sitting 15 feet away. My blood. My family. "I didn't survive that ambush because of dumb luck," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't echo. It drove straight into the floorboards. "I survived so I could come back and expose you." Robert finally looked up at me. His eyes were watering. He opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to offer another pathetic excuse. I cut him off. "You sold your honor." I stated, my tone dropping to a cold, flat executioner's pitch. "Now you pay for it with your freedom." I turned away from him and faced the 3-judge panel. I nodded once. Admiral Harris picked up his wooden gavel. He didn't hesitate. He brought it down hard on the sounding block. Crack. The defendants, Robert Noble and Derek Noble, are remanded into federal custody immediately pending trial for treason and economic espionage. Bail is denied. United States Marshals secure the prisoners. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 4 federal marshals stepped inside. Tactical gear, stone faces. They moved straight to the defense table. "Stand up, hands behind your back." Robert didn't fight. He stood up slowly, a broken, heavy old man. A marshal grabbed his thick wrists, pulling them roughly behind his back. Click, zip. The sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking around Robert's wrists was sharp, metallic, final. Derek started hyperventilating as the cold steel bit into his own wrists, his legs buckling as a marshal hauled him up by the biceps. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I just watched the mechanics of justice process the garbage. Janice and April were left sitting at the table, surrounded by empty chairs, completely ignored by the marshals. They were unindicted co-conspirators for now. Their punishment was bankruptcy and public disgrace. I reached up with my right hand. I didn't wear the white gloves today. My bare fingers brushed the cool bronze of the purple heart on my chest. I closed my fist around it. The metal edges dug into my palm, grounding me. The target was neutralized. The mission was over. I turned my back on the defense table. I didn't look at them as they were marched out the side door. I walked straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. The rubber heels of my combat boots hit the floor in a steady, measured rhythm. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the empty hallway. The air outside the courtroom was still. The adrenaline that had kept my blood pumping for the last 48 hours suddenly evaporated. I stopped walking. I stood alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I had won. I had burned the rotten house to the ground. But as I stood there in the absolute silence staring at the empty corridor, the cold reality finally hit me. I was completely, utterly alone. 3 months later. The federal judge didn't blink when he handed down the sentences. 15 years in federal lockup for Robert and Derek. No chance of early parole. Janice filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks later to dodge the asset seizures. April got a 3-year suspended sentence and a permanent felony record for evidence tampering. The noble empire was dead, buried under a mountain of federal paperwork. The Navy gave me a 6-month administrative leave. They called it honor restoration. I called it house arrest. I spent the first month locked inside my bare 1-bedroom apartment. No TV, no radio, just the hum of the refrigerator. The silence of peacetime was suffocating. It weighed heavy on my chest, pressing down harder than the enemy fire in Yemen ever did. On the battlefield, you have a target. Here, I just had ghosts and a last name I despised. I was sitting on the floor staring at a blank wall when the front door unlocked. Clack, drag, clack, drag. I didn't reach for a weapon. I knew the sound. Ethan Cole walked into the living room. His heavy titanium leg brace clicked rhythmically against the cheap laminate floor. He held 2 mugs of black coffee. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just set a mug down on the floor next to me. "You look like hell, Ollie," Ethan said flatly. He leaned his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting across from me. "You're treating this apartment like a holding cell." I picked up the mug. The coffee was scalding hot. "I burned my own house down, Ethan. I don't exactly feel like throwing a parade." Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at me, his eyes hard and uncompromising. "You burned a meth lab down, Ollie. Don't confuse it with a home," he said. The harsh truth stung, but it was accurate. "You set the fire so you could see in the dark. Now you have the light. Stop staring at the ashes. Make the scars mean something, or you're just insulting the guys who didn't make it back." He stood up, the brace locking into place with a sharp snap. He walked out, leaving the front door unlocked. 2 days passed. The silence in the apartment felt a little less heavy. Then came a knock at the door. It wasn't a hard, confident knock. It was hesitant. 3 light taps. I pulled the door open, expecting a delivery driver. I froze. Standing in the hallway was a 16-year-old girl. She wore a faded, oversized hoodie, her hands desperately gripping a heavy silver laptop against her chest. Her blue-gray eyes were bloodshot and completely flooded with tears. Hannah, Derek's daughter, my niece. I hadn't seen her since before the deployment. In the chaos of the arrests and the trial, I had completely forgotten about the collateral damage. Hannah looked up at me. Her bottom lip trembled violently. Before I could say a word, she lunged forward. She buried her face into the front of my shirt, her small hands grabbing fistfuls of the fabric. She was shaking uncontrollably, her tears soaking instantly through the thin cotton. I didn't step back. My military training kicked in. I braced my feet, wrapping one arm around her shoulders to stabilize her. "Hannah," I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register. "Breathe." "What happened?" She pulled back just enough to look at me. She shoved the heavy laptop into my hands. "Aunt Ollie." Hannah choked out, her voice raw. I took it. I snuck into Aunt April's room before the marshals locked the house. I took her hard drive. I looked down at the silver laptop. My mind raced. The video. Hannah wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve. The one she posted on the internet. I know she faked it. I saw her using the software to make your voice sound crazy. I found the raw audio files, the real ones. My grip on the laptop tightened. The deep-fake audio. The lie that had turned half the country against me, branding me a traitor with severe PTSD. I already sent the raw files to the FBI agent in charge of the case. Hannah said, her voice suddenly finding a tiny shred of steel. I sent it to the Navy JAG office too. I told them everything. I stared at the 16-year-old kid standing in my hallway. She was Derek's blood. She grew up in Robert's house. She was supposed to be exactly like them. Selfish, cowardly, willing to lie to survive. But she wasn't. She had risked her own safety, turned against her own father to clear the name of an aunt she barely knew. Just because it was the right thing to do. The thick, heavy ice that had been crushing my chest for 3 months suddenly cracked open. "Why did you do that, Hannah?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, her blue-gray eyes completely clear now. "Because I don't want to be a monster like them. I don't want to be a liar." I didn't offer her a polite, socially acceptable hug. I dropped the laptop onto the couch, reached out, and pulled her into a solid, bone-crushing military bear hug. I held the back of her head, feeling the profound relief wash over me. The generational trauma was broken. The rot stopped here. "You aren't a monster, kid," I whispered fiercely. "You just salvaged the last shred of honor left in the noble family." 5 years later. The coastal breeze coming off the Charleston harbor didn't smell like old motor oil and damp sawdust anymore. It smelled clean, salt, and cold water. I stood on the thick, concrete seawall and watched the sun start its slow drop over the Atlantic. The sky was burning, deep orange bleeding into a harsh, brilliant purple. I turned around and looked at the property behind me. Robert's rotting shipyard was gone. The feds had seized the land to pay off the massive federal fines. When it went up for public auction, I bought it. I used the back pay, the hazard compensation, and the money I made from consulting for naval intelligence. I didn't buy it to build boats. I brought in the heavy dozers and bulldozed the pass straight into the dirt. Now standing on that exact same plot of land was a modern 3-story facility. Concrete, steel, and heavy pane glass. The large sign over the double doors read, "Noble Veteran Transition Center." I took the name that my father and brother dragged through the mud and forced it to mean something else. A place for combat vets dealing with PTSD. A place to get housing assistance, legal help, and a damn job when the civilian world turned its back. Down in the courtyard, Admiral Harris, now retired, wearing a sharp civilian suit, was cutting a red ribbon with an oversized pair of ceremonial scissors. The local press cameras flashed. Ethan Cole was standing next to him, coordinating the crowd, leaning his weight onto his titanium leg brace. He caught my eye through the second-floor window and gave a short 2-finger salute. I nodded back. I stepped away from the window and walked back to my desk. It wasn't cheap oak. It was solid, polished steel. Sitting dead center on the desk was a heavy wooden display block. Resting on the velvet inlay was the Purple Heart. I didn't keep it locked in a rusted steel box under the seat of my truck anymore. I didn't hide it. It wasn't a symbol of Robert's betrayal or April's fake internet outrage. It was the foundation block, the physical proof that I survived the fire and then used the ashes to build a fortress. The heavy door to my office opened. "Lieutenant." I looked up. Hannah stood in the doorway. She was 21 now. She wasn't wearing a faded, oversized hoodie. She wore the immaculate, razor-sharp dress whites of a United States Naval Academy midshipman. Her spine was straight, shoulders perfectly square. Her blue-gray eyes didn't hold a single drop of fear or hesitation. She snapped a flawless regulation salute. I stood up and returned it. "At ease, midshipman," I said. Hannah dropped her hand and relaxed her stance just a fraction. She walked over to the desk and looked down at the Purple Heart sitting in the dying sunlight. "They asked me about you today," Hannah said, her voice steady. "During my final clearance interview, they brought up the old file, the treason charges, my dad, my grandfather." I kept my face neutral. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. I told them my bloodline doesn't define my loyalty." She looked up, holding my gaze. "They cleared me for deployment next month." I felt a hard, tight knot of pride lock into place in my chest. She was going to be a hell of an officer. Hannah reached out her fingers, hovering just inches over the gold profile of Washington on the medal. She hesitated. And Ollie, she said quietly, the formal tone dropping for a second. After 5 years, after everything they did you ever forgive them? I turned and looked back out the large glass window. The sun was almost gone, slipping beneath the dark, churning water of the harbor. The tide was coming in, the waves slamming hard against the concrete barrier, washing away the dirt on the shore. Forgiveness isn't about letting bad people off the hook, Hannah, I said, my voice completely devoid of anger or sadness. It's about looking at the brutal reality of what they did, accepting it, and then refusing to let it control your life. You don't forgive them for their peace. You forgive the situation so you can build your own. Hannah watched me for a long moment. She nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the words. You found your peace then, she said. I turned my back to the window. I looked at the steel desk, the metal, the young naval officers standing in front of me, and the facility outside filled with soldiers getting a second chance. The corner of my mouth pulled up into a slow, hard smile. No, I said. I took it. Forgiveness is not forgetting the crime. It is building your own peace on top of the ashes they left behind. If you are ready to stop being a victim and start taking back your life, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below with the word freedom. Let this story be the armor you wear against the people who share your blood but not your honor.